From Rythmia Life Advancement Center in Guanacaste, Costa Rica, the only life advancement center in the world that uses ayahuasca, metaphysical teachings, farm-to-table organic food, the Dead Sea Cleanse, breathwork, yoga, meditation, and, and a whole lot more to bring about a life-changing miracle during your 1 week stay. How do I know that? Over 16,000 people have come here and gone through the doors. And 98.11% say they had a life-changing miracle during their stay. 90.22% at the 6-month mark say that this was the week that changed their life. We get all kinds of people here. On my board of directors, Jack Canfield, Chicken Soup of the Soul, Cesar Millan, the Dog Whisperer, Kelly Slater, the Surfer, Ron White, the comedian, Michael Bernard Beckwith from the Agape Spiritual Center, Martin Luther King's son, Martin, Earl Koski, the businessman, Tony Coe, a Fortune 100 person, and much more. Those are folks who just sit on our board. We get people from all over the world, from all walks of life, who come here to have this miracle happen. And that miracle is a soul reclamation or a soul merger, and it consistently happens here. Consistently happens here. We're the only place in the world that does this kind of program and brings about this kind of result. And one of the things that happens to those 16,000 people that have this thing happen, they desire thereafter, they make a commitment to become a beneficial presence on the planet. And I want to say something. Yes, we get more billionaires than you can shake a stick at. We get musical artists, we get actors, actresses, models, business people, athletes, sports folks, and normal people like you and I come in droves to have this thing happen, this soul merger. And right after that, people generally decide, and by generally, I'm going to say over 90% of the time, decide to become a beneficial presence on the planet, to donate their life to getting off this side of the balance sheet and getting on this side, to move off becoming off a liability and to become an asset, to change their way of thinking from what can you do for me and what's in it for me to what can I do for you and what can I give you. It's a whole different methodology. And in becoming this beneficial presence, it is a really hard thing. It's going to be harder than anything you've ever done. It's going to take longer than you've ever imagined, and it's going to deliver more fruit than you could ever wishfully even conceive. It produces so much fruit. It's the most beautiful thing, and it will be the hardest thing you've ever done. Interesting thing, one of the guys on my board of directors is Jack Canfield, who's in the Guinness Book World Records. He's a world record holding author. One of his books sold 500 million copies, Chicken Soup of the Soul. 500 million copies. And I want to talk a little bit about success today because the byproduct of becoming a beneficial presence generally is notoriety or financial energetic gifts, money coming in addition to the feeling of being really important to your community, your world, your church, your group, your family, to being super important, meaning giving more than taking. That's the thing. So when I talk about success, people say, well, were you successful? And I was moderately successful. I was a guy that didn't graduate high school. I took a company public and had a $130 million net worth. And then for my second thing, I sold a company to a public company that I sold for about $91 million that I owned 75%. So I had a little bit that's moderate success. I know billionaires that made 10 times more than me, but I was moderately successful. And of the times for being a high school dropout, I did pretty good. Now, I want to talk about quitting. It's one of my favorite things to discuss, and how, there's a saying, quitters never win and winners never quit. There's truth to that. It's not in the parlance of our times, in the thought processes of today. Old-fashioned things are looked over, right? Everybody's about what can I get for free and who's holding it for me. I'm not talking about that mentality. I'm talking about the what can I do for the world mentality that frees you from the slavery of wanting something from someone else into this cycle of abundance, of true abundance. So one of the guys who sits on my board, again, is Jack Canfield. Jack Canfield wrote the Chicken Soup of the Soul book. And it's such an interesting story because I want to address not quitting. And I said to him, and he was sitting at this table right here, I said, this past week when he was here, I said, Jack, tell me about how that happened, about the start of the Chicken Soup book, because I'm an author. I have 2 books out there, and I wanted to pick the brains of the most successful author I know, and he's it. And he said to me, Jerry, well, it's not a really happy story. I said, why not? He said, well, it ended up happy, but I went to 143 publishers, and they all turned me down. Every publisher. Now imagine how you would feel after the first 10 turned you down. Then let's get crazy and say, how would you feel after the first 50 turned you down? And then extrapolate that. And talk about definiteness of purpose, because he saw something from the wholeness of his being and knew that one writing would be a beneficial presence on the planet. It's 50 years later, and the books are still in people's houses and still being read. But the 144th publisher said yes. Just think about that. Just think about you and your own current circumstances and how feeble you are, how easy it is for you to entertain the thought of quitting and even quit. And we talked about this. We talked about the people who quit. And usually they quit in the first 3 to 5 years of their chosen endeavor. Usually they quit, and therefore they end up repeating what's known as startup their whole life, and they never get to mastery. They never get there. They never, ever, ever get there. So I'm going to tell you that this thought of quitting, so there's 2 components to that puzzle that might make us quit. The first one is picking our event or agenda, what we want to become from a broken part of us. So what do I mean by that? So let's say everybody's getting into advertising, and I say, I want to be in advertising because I want to own a BMW to impress my neighbor. Well, I'm going to tell you what, that is such a weak and egocentric start to this run, that at the first time it gets inconvenient or hard or undoable, you quit, right? And the second one is exceptionally hard circumstances where you picked it from the right place, but you've run into exceptionally hard circumstances. And I'm going to tell you, nobody fails from the latter. Because if it's picked from the right place and you have the right mindset, there is no circumstance that can keep you from it. There's not. Read a little bit about the start of Starbucks and how they went to get funded, and they went to 216 banks and lending sources and equity partners, and they were all turned down. The 217th said yes. You want to talk about determination? You want to talk about something picked from a brilliance, because everybody would say nobody's going to pay that much for a cup of coffee, but take a look now. Take a look now, right? And this is all of our story. It's every man's story. It's every woman's story, that we had this thing and that we gave up on. I'm going to tell you what changed, for me, is because I had failed all the way up until I was 26 years old. I had two businesses. I had one business that failed horribly, and I kept popping around from job to job and da-da-da-da-da. And yet, when I stuck to something, I made my first million and saved $1 million in my 20s and bought my first plane at 32. So I learned that quitting was not an option. It just wouldn't come to me. One day we're going to write the story of Rythmia, and we're going to show you how many opportunities we had to quit this and didn't, and just kept making it better and better. And through this, take a look at my board of directors. Take a look at the people that are involved with this. That all came from not quitting. And hopefully, I'm 60 years old. Let's hope I can work for another 20 years, like Jack Canfield is 80 this year, and he's working hard and pushing on. Let's hope I have another 20 years. Let's see where this is for me and for my team. And I have the best team I've ever had in the history of Rythmia. Let's see what the next 20 years brings us. But I can promise you something. We will not quit. Just won't quit. Now I'm going to tell you energetically what happens. Excuse me. What happens energetically when you won't quit? A lot of people think that, okay, once I pick this thing from the right piece of me and I make an agreement to give it a minimum of 7 to 14 years, 10 years, let's say, is the commitment, then things will get easy for me, but they won't. You see, it's around the decade mark that things start to get easier. And that's the absolute truth. It's not easy. It's incredibly hard until inertia takes over. And inertia happens when you convince the universe that you're not quitting. Because when you convince the universe that you're not quitting, then people love to get on a moving train with others. They love it. So what happens is, initially, you're pushing forward against static energy. And everybody knows static energy is hard. It's hard to move this way, creates friction, right? This is you and this is the energy. You're creating friction. But once the universe is convinced, then others are convinced. And what happens is, as you go this way, all of a sudden, people start hopping on, and it creates an eddy. And instead of having resistance, you're actually being pulled. And that's when inertia takes over. And that's when stuff looks easy. That's when everything looks easy. Now, I don't know if you ever heard of this term, but a 10-year overnight success. Everybody I know, and I'm going to tell you, the people who've accumulated the most wealth that I know are people who've been in their business 15, 20, and 30 years. If you take a look at Tony Ko, she sold her company, NYX Cosmetics, I think, to L'Oreal, but that was a 30-year overnight success story. 30 years. Take a look at my dear friend, Papa John, and what he had to go through. That's a 30-year story. So if you're really going to stick with something, look at Michael Beckwith, the founder of Agape. If you're really going to do it, my problem is around the 10-year mark in my history, I've always gotten off the ship. That's it. So I make it the 10 years, but I don't make it the 30. At least I haven't in the past. So if you're really going to go for to really make a change, you got to have even a longer view. And if I were lucky enough I have one boy who's 15, and you know what I will tell him is the greatest way for you to create an impact is to look at the world and solve a problem through a company and build that company for 15, 20, 30 years. That's the truth. Now, we do the same thing with our churches, with our communities, with our family, with our own gifts. Take a look at the greatest musicians, right? They're not kids. They're people that have gotten, right before Prince died, watch him play guitar. He was at the height of his greatness. Watch athletes that are at the height of their greatness. They're usually at the 15-year mark of playing. That's the truth of this thing. Now, there are people out there that are going to sell you an easy way out. They will sell you. You pay me and I will show you a shortcut. But there ain't none. There is not one. If you take a look in the music business at people who achieved success through a song prior to the rest of everything being ready, they're called one-hit wonders. You never see them again. Early success is a curse. It is. So know that. Know that if you can bite the bullet and know that it's going to take that long, your life immediately that day gets better. Because what I see people all the time that are expecting it to be easy, and for 5 years they're pissed off because it's not happening the way they expected it. See, I take a different look at this. I expect it to be hard, but I also expect it to yield more fruit than I could ever imagine at some point down the road. I do. And then I fall in love with the hardness of the journey. And if you can do that, nobody can beat you. You might get, I had businesses in certain states where they outlawed the business. That's okay. Being told you can't participate, that's as far as you can take it. We opened in other states where it was legal. I've had that happen. That's fine. Just don't quit. And just know it's going to take you a long time. And if you get that, the moment that you come to grips with it, you're free. Beautifully free. So listen, enjoy this week. God bless you. God keep you. God hold you. And we will talk to you next week. And by all means, this book talks about this very thing. This book talks about what got me to start Rythmia. But I want to tell you, before you do anything else, if you've never been here, please get here. Every person that we get to come here, 97% of the time, has a different life from that day forward. Please come here. It's not whether you can afford to, it's can you afford not to come here. Okay, great. Have a wonderful week. We'll talk to you next week.